Hi, my name is Isaac Nellist, and welcome to the latest episode of the Green Left Show. Today, we're going to be talking about what has been described as a political earthquake in the US with the win of the Democratic primary election for the New York City mayor by socialist candidate Zohran Mamdani. Now, Mamdani is a member of the Democratic Socialists of America and was up against the deep pockets of the Democratic establishment who were supporting the former governor Andrew Cuomo. And this win has been celebrated by socialists and the broader left around the world as a spark of hope in an era defined by the rise of the far right and the Donald Trump administration. And so to talk about this campaign and what it means for broader politics in the United States and around the world, we're joined by Democratic Socialists of America Bread and Roses caucus member Winnie Marion, who is also been involved in the campaign and other campaigns for local council positions in New York. Before we get to that, though, I'd just like to mention that this podcast has been recorded on stolen land. I'm speaking from the land of the Gadigal people, land that was never ceded and always was, always will be Aboriginal land. Green Left pledges to stand with First Nations people in campaigns for justice, sovereignty and land rights. I'd also like to mention before we start that if you liked this interview and want to support the work that we do here at Green Left, please head to greenleft.org.au/support and become a supporter. And plans start from just $5 a month. And it's the best way to both, help this work continue and also the best way to receive the content. So that's greenleft.org.au/support. So I started by asking Winnie to explain why the Zohran Mamdani campaign has been so successful.
Yeah, I think as you mentioned, we've been experiencing this rise in far-right politics in the US, but also around the world. And in our two-party system, we have been offered two options, which is the far-right extreme views that are putting working class people under the bus to service billionaires in the interests of the ultra wealthy. And alternatively, people that are unwilling to stand up to that agenda and continue to try to push forward the status quo. And the left in the US, being the Democratic Party, which is the more left party, has not been able to present an alternative vision that has inspired people or excited them to fight for anything that betters their worldview, betters affordability, which are the key issues that we're facing. When it's inflation, when rent costs are so high, nobody has alternative options that they see in the political framework. When you canvass New York City voters all the time, you'll hear people just say, I gave up on voting years ago because nobody presents a vision that inspires me. And Zohran has presented a vision that does actually inspire people. And we can see that from the voter turnout. It's a lot of first-time voters, a lot of younger voters, a lot of people that have otherwise not participated in our Democratic primary in New York City, being excited by a vision for the future that they can actually believe in, but also presents a real alternative to the right-wing movement we've been seeing. So much of our city's institutions have been under attack by the Trump administration, even on the municipal level. So just having somebody to be able to say confidently that they can stand up to Donald Trump and that far right administration by having this inspirational socialist politics and having a movement behind him, I think is excited and moved a lot of people into support that might have been skeptical at first too.
Yeah, definitely. It seems like there's a huge upswing of support from just ordinary people who have been getting involved in the campaign. So I was interested to hear a bit about your experience, I guess, being part of the campaign. What was it like kind of on the ground? And also, how did it compare to kind of other Democratic campaigns and other DSA specific campaigns? And also like just a few comments about like the campaign infrastructure, how it all was kind of being run as well would be interesting to know.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been amazing on the ground to have so many people coming to all of our campuses and so much excitement. For example, the city council member that I work for is also running for reelection, and just having so many people come to canvass for her because she was doing, joint door knocking with Zohran and all of this was so exciting. And a lot of times it would be, on the doors, like anecdotally, we'd talk to young people who knew about Zohran and then older folks who knew about Alexa, and being able to use both of those tie-ins of other DSA candidates that we've run in the past, to talk to people about the issues that we care about was so exciting, and so helpful for reaching this broad base. But on the ground, we've had, I think it's the number is like 50,000 volunteers knocking 1.5 million doors and making millions of phone calls to New Yorkers. So obviously this extremely energized movement with a lot of people coming out. Um, and that's looks like, structure wise, we have field leads who are also usually DSA members or a part of other organizations in the city. Coming and taking on leadership roles to also help out new volunteers and continuing to build that up and bring in more and more people. But it's great to be able to go to all these campuses and talk to people who have never door knocked for anything before and are all of a sudden inspired to join. I would say I joined DSA in 2020 through the Bernie campaign. And there was so much excitement at that time, leading to like almost an immediate down of just like sadness when he dropped out, and the all that happened to come in the next few years. And so I think a lot of socialists in the US have felt like we are building towards kind of a moment of movement in the future, like trying to build up our local campaigns and our local infrastructure to have the institutional knowledge to understand what it's like to run these campaigns. We have nine, I believe, state and local elected officials in New York City, but all kind of like building up the structures to be able to implement something at the big mayoral level like this. And that all kind of came together, I think, tied into a moment when people feel such dissatisfaction with politics as they are currently. And also, of course, with like the past year of witnessing a genocide, and all of that kind of came together um, to excite and mobilize a lot of new volunteers. And in the aftermath, a lot of new people have also joined DSA, which is a great secondary, excitement of the campaign.
Yeah, it sounds like it would have been a very exciting experience to be part of, especially for a lot of these new people who haven't been involved in any campaigns or anything before. And you mentioned that like this is a victory, not just for a specific candidate, but like for the kind of upswell of people who have been involved in this. And I guess what, as you mentioned as well, like DSA has grown out of, had a huge boost from the Bernie campaign, and huge boosts I've heard from Donald Trump's election as well. So people obviously looking for kind of alternatives to get involved in when things are looking bad or when things are looking exciting. So there's those two levels. But I guess in terms of this campaign, what role was kind of DSA playing as opposed to kind of the broader non-DSA kind of members who are, or not members, campaigners who are involved? And what lessons are kind of being drawn from this that can be taken so that there's not the same kind of demoralization that was experienced after Bernie?
Yeah, DSA. So the campaign had its own infrastructure as far as a lot of these things, what was built on a lot of the infrastructure that we've had for past DSA campaigns, and similar people working as staff on Zoran's campaign versus previous DSA campaigns were in DSA leadership positions. And DSA just played a large role as far as turning volunteers out to canvases and phone banks and taking on leadership positions and using that to organize people. There's a coalition of other organizations that were also involved in Zoran's campaign, but I think DSA was the main energy behind a lot of things that were happening. Obviously, Zoran's been kind of, working with DSA for a long time since he was elected and first endorsed and run. His campaign was run by DSA back in 2020 too. And so I think like learning from this in the future, I think we'll have a lot of lessons to continue to learn as we run this type of big race. I think one though is that I think being able to experiment at a time when people are feeling such dissatisfaction is really important. So being able to like try these large scale campaigns and see what we can come away with at times that are strategic in moments that make sense is something that's going to be exciting to see what we can accomplish. I also think, not being afraid of embracing wholeheartedly a lot of things that people generally find as like, oh, you can't say that if you're running for mayor. You can't be, pro Palestinian liberation. You can't use the word socialist. You can't. And I think Zohran is not afraid to accept a lot of these things, and I think we found that a lot of people actually really connected with that message. And more so too, I think one thing to take away, this is not necessarily the structure of the campaign, but having a very clear policy platform that lays out just a few key programs that he wants to implement that are beneficial and tangible to working class New Yorkers. So free buses, making groceries more affordable by setting up a pilot program for public grocery stores, universal child care. These things are very clear, understandable to people, connect to people's daily lives, and don't go into a lot of, I think, the technical jargon that people maybe feel disconnects them from everyday political understanding, and gets down to the nitty gritty of like what's going to make your life better this year, this mayoral term, and how can we together work to achieve that.
Yeah, awesome. My next question is probably a bit of a broad one and a bit of speculation required, probably. But I was just curious what you think the impact will be of the Mamdani's win in this campaign, and also in potential win in the mayoral election in November, on kind of broader politics in the US. I mean, I already saw that Donald Trump has threatened to deport Zohran and other things like that. So there's definitely kind of resistance from the ruling class. So I just curious about your take on all of that.
Yeah, I think it's hard to predict what Donald Trump is going to do because every day I am surprised reading the news about how horrible and heartless so much of his political agenda is, especially, dealing with a lot of immigration issues in New York City. That being said, I think people are being forced to grapple with the fact that that the Democratic Party has not presented a vision that excites people for so many years, and that has led to this underlying both like class consciousness as far as people seeing themselves as connecting to Zoran's campaign, whether or not previously you might have not been politically engaged or voted even more to the right of Zohran, but seeing this as a platform that connects with you as like a working class New Yorker. I think that people like the establishment and Democratic politicians will try to sort of replicate a lot of his policy platforms. We saw that on the local level a lot after we won campaigns in 2020, where people would try to run campaigns that were establishment campaigns and funded by real estate, but adopted a lot of the language that we used in our socialist platform, but towards like a progressive platform. But if you look into the money behind it, you can see that obviously these people are not going to align with what we're doing. And they have, they're not accountable to the movement in the same way that our candidates are. And so I think that people will probably try to do a similar thing as far as running candidates that have a progressive policy platform, but maybe are not as beholden to any sort of movement, or you can see like that the money doesn't necessarily track. And so I think it'll be about continuing to distinguish like what it means to be a socialist in the US versus like, a progressive politician that does not act in the same way that they say that they're going to act. In addition, I think that, it'll be interesting to see how the right wing tries to use Zohran to advance their political agenda. I think we can see that consistently. There's a conversation in past mayoral terms between the federal government and New York City's mayor as far as like how they're managing things and using that to further whatever political goals they're trying to achieve in the federal government. So that'll be an interesting thing to witness and see how that plays out. But it'll, I think, depend a lot on how November's election goes and other things. It's important to note Eric Adams, the current mayor of New York City, who's running for re-election against Zohran in the general, on an independent party line, has said that the Democratic Party left him and has been aligning with Trump interests, allegedly, we would say. This is because he thinks that he can get out of a lot of corruption by aligning himself with Trump's interests. And thus, the city council currently has filed a lawsuit against him for having, again, an alleged quid pro quo with the Trump administration to set up ICE on our jail, Rikers Island, to be able to more readily and speedily deport people. And that's currently has a temporary restraining order, but we're seeing how that will play out. So there's a lot of politics as far as it's very much within Donald Trump's interest for Eric Adams to get reelected as a mayor. It's very much not in his interest for Zohran to be elected as mayor of New York City. However, we've already seen that Donald Trump has been using sanctuary cities across the U.S. and including this week where they sued or threatened to sue, I don't remember, LA over their sanctuary city policies, but we'll see how they'll act similarly to New York City, but be particularly harsh, trying to make New York City an example, basically, for cities across the U.S. And so it'll be about how do we set up a front where our city infrastructure and our politics are strong enough to continue to combat this honestly often fascist policy agenda.
Yeah, 100%. And I mean, there was a huge amount of money raised by the Democratic establishment to oppose Zohran's campaign and support Cuomo and other candidates. But and I'm sure that that'll be even more intensified for the actual election in November. I was just curious about I've kind of skipped over this kind of question because a lot of us have been seeing the really great social media videos and stuff that the campaign has put out. But I was wondering if you could just briefly run through kind of the key proposals and things that Zohran has been putting forward for the campaign.
Yeah, so like I said, free buses. So originally Zohran passed a free bus pilot a couple of years ago, which meant that in every borough of New York City, one of the bus lines was going to be free. It was placed in whichever area of the borough had the most low-income constituents. But this would be expanding it to all of our bus lines. I'm sure people are familiar that New York City has pretty great public transportation as far as we have extensive train lines, but we also have buses and a great bus system. But our bus system is oftentimes used by more working class New Yorkers. So a long history of transit, but there's a lot of transit desert pockets in New York City where people have to rely on bus service rather than trains. So this would be an excellent, service for a lot of working class New Yorkers to be able to have more mobility to the city. Similarly to how the original bus pilot worked, he wants to set up this public grocery store system where there would be one grocery store in every borough of New York City that would be a public grocery store. The intention is that currently we have so much inflation with our prices that having a public option that we don't have to subsidize private grocery stores and we can spend actually less money to try to push prices down by having an option that's more affordable would help make these groceries more accessible to New Yorkers. Universal child care. So a lot our current costs for childcare in New York City, but like across the US, is extensive. A lot of people spend huge percentages of their income on childcare. And then I'm trying to think of the other few handful, but I can pull it up quickly because it's usually right. Oh, so this is another thing. So much of our city's budget goes towards the NYPD. The NYPD is a militarized police force. The NYPD is so often tasked with the role of operating as mental health service, physical health service, emergency responders in so many different contexts. But we do not have people, while we spend so much money on having personnel in the form of NYPD to respond to what is like crime, but is often also mental health crises or other things, we don't have people that are trained to do that. So Zohran wants to set up a Department of Community Safety, which pushes some of our funds into having people that are trained to dealing with the issues that they're dealing with. That's a lot of words to say, not just sending somebody who has no background in mental health care and no training to do that, to go in and service somebody in the middle of a mental health crisis, which will drastically reduce a lot of violence from police towards average working class New Yorkers. And then rent freeze. So in New York City, we have rent controlled apartments and rent stabilized apartments. Rent stabilized apartments are much more common. Every year, there's a rent guidelines board that votes to raise the rents by a certain amount for rent stabilized tenants in particular. This won't affect market rate housing. But rent stabilized apartments, this year, for example, the Rent Guidelines Board voted this week that all rents can be raised by 3% for the next year. So this would put a rent freeze on raises for the rent stabilized tenants in New York City so that they wouldn't have additional costs. This is still varies. The cost of rent stabilized apartments across the city vary, and based on like how many raises people have had, where they've signed certain leases, how that works and what kind of apartments they are, but they won't be able to continue to increase. And then the plan is to do all of this by raising taxes at the state level on people that make over $1 million in income per year. So just the ultra wealthy in our state and corporate taxes, but that's a tax platform that our socialists in office have been championing on the state level for many years.
It's good to hear, about the focus on the kind of bread and butter issues, the kind of economic issues that are affecting everyday kind of working class people. I think the other notable thing that we've seen from afar is that Zohran was the only candidate to speak up for Palestine or kind of oppose Israel's genocide. I was just wondering if you think that had what impact that had on the campaign.
Yeah, obviously it's elicited a lot of anger on the other side. I would say that right now people have been witnessing a genocide happening for a year, if not longer, and have been completely demoralized about these politics. Last year, there was encampments across universities in the US, and people also saw university admin going into our college campuses with militarized police forces and tracking down just campus protesters that were trying to exercise free speech, even to the extent where in New York City at Columbia University, they sent in NYPD officers who fired guns in buildings, or you had a city council member who showed up to a different college campus with a gun herself. But of course, like as the media has been very targeted against a lot of these college campus protesters, it has aided Donald Trump being able to go in and now deport people who were part of these protests and demand that colleges give lists of people who participated in protests and defund, or like cut funding to colleges that allow these protests to go on, which is, in the history of the US, college campus protest has been a heart of so many social movements, anti-war movements, other things. So it's really a turn away against, I guess, our history of protest that is, fought against racist principles, other principles. And I think that a lot of the young people who came out to vote for Zohran have been in the middle of seeing this, being on social media and having this now like being able to witness everything that's happening, the violence that's happening against people, while also seeing Mahmoud Khalil, a former graduate student at Columbia, being held in detention for months on end and not being able to witness the birth of his child, a green card, or not just a green card holder in the US, but a full-time permanent resident. Oh, wait, sorry, I meant not just a visa resident in the US, but a green card holder, a full-time permanent resident, whose spouse is a citizen of the US. And while we watch this, and for time not even knowing where this person is being held, and not even knowing the conditions that are going on currently at 26 Federal Plaza, which is a federal immigration court in the US. We see daily detentions by ICE. And so all of this immigration landscape, coupled with understanding the horrors that are going on in Palestine right now, and seeing the global humanitarian crisis, and knowing that a lot of politicians have been unafraid, or have been very afraid to speak up for that, and knowing that Zohran is speaking to the humanitarian crisis, but also the crisis of our taxpayer dollars are going to fund this violence right now. And we should be spending money on the affordability crisis that exists in the US, and not continuing to fund militarization in another part of the world that is enacting violence. And I think that people have felt very passionate about this, and are and I think that has supported him, although a lot of people have said that Zohran, have attacked Zohran for this, but additionally, he is doing so much in his platform to try to combat all types of hate crimes in New York City, in a broad and systemic way that I think goes deeper to the core than a lot of other candidates. So I think people really respect this. But he's also been attacked with a lot of Islamophobia on the other end, including from a senator this week, who has tonight apologized for her comments on public radio, but it's pretty disheartening to see.
Yeah, definitely good to see him standing up for that, and yeah, terrible to hear about the Islamophobia, but we've been seeing that as well from online and things like that. Always something that's very disheartening to see, as you said. I guess to go in a bit more of a theoretical direction, there's always a bit of debate amongst the left on kind of the role of participating in elections and things like that, in terms of kind of winning change or building towards socialist politics, and kind of building campaigns and things like that. So I was curious about your take on this generally, and what does the Zohran Mamdani campaign reveal about the kind of strengths and weaknesses of engaging in the electoral sphere? Just curious about your take on that.
Yeah, I think a lot of working class people only know their connection to politics as a connection to voting, and don't yet see themselves as people who can participate in politics in everyday life, and organization. And so I think it's continuously important that we use the ballot box as an avenue to be able to mobilize and excite people towards our politics. That means, in a lot of contexts, I think running these campaigns that speak about socialism unabashedly, that are excited about our movement and what that means, as Zohran has done, not just in this campaign, but in previous years, as an elected official. And I think that it's really important for us to be able to use these platforms, and in New York City, use matching funds to be able to talk with people about what it means to have these politics, and show hope that there is a vision for the future that is not just a lesser of two evils. And I think that really excites and mobilizes people. But I also think, on the other end, hopefully people see this vision and know that Zohran's not going to be able to implement this on his own. The dark money does not stop in our electoral sphere. The funding for his opponents against him does not stop. It's going to be very hard to implement a lot of his policy platform. He's going to be getting attacks in every which way against what he's doing. So I think that, seeing this as a first step to having to build a movement to support the things that he's doing and continue to try to advocate for them is going to be crucial. And so, knowing that electoral politics are a helpful tool for us being able to talk to people about socialist politics, for being able to build power, to be able to pass legislation and be actors standing up against capitalist, fascist regimes as they exist now, but also knowing that that's not going to go the whole way at stopping them. It is a tool that we use within the political arena to be able to continue to organize people, show them a better vision for the future, build class consciousness, and excite people towards the socialist vision we want to see. But it's a good framework to be able to do that with a clear policy platform and an avenue that people understand.
Yeah, nice. Thanks for that. My final question is, I guess, what are the next steps following this important win, both, I guess, for DSA and the left more broadly in the US? What's the next steps for the campaign?
Well, he has to win in November is the next step. We're going up against Eric Adams. People think that this means that, a lot more capitalist force is going to wake up against him. I think that it'll be very hard for Eric Adams with so much corruption in his administration and so much failure to deliver for New Yorkers and to protect New Yorkers at a basic level. When we are seeing these attacks from our federal administration, it's going to be very hard for him to try to sell himself as somebody who's right to fit to lead at this point. But next steps is also, when we look at what it means to be a mayor of New York, it's not just a politician, it's also somebody who's managing a city government. And that's a very hard job. And when we think back to the history of New York and mayoral administrations, it's very difficult to get a political agenda across. And since 1975, New York City has been suffering under fiscal austerity regimes and this fiscal austerity kind of mindset from the state government, from the city government, from the federal government, and has been cutting, public programs for people. And so it's been a fight to constantly kind of revive the idea that New York City is a city for the people who live there and who work there, and not just a city for, economic revenue. And so I think continuing to fight that, but also being able to build out an administration that's able to affect change that speaks to people's lives is going to be a challenge, and going to be something that we really have to take seriously over, the next few months, if not years, and continue to try to support what that looks like.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Winnie. Was there any final comments you wanted to make before we finish up?
I'm really excited. It's been a great energy in New York City since he's won. People stop you all the time with your Zohran pin and, oh, do you really think he's going to win in November? I absolutely do. And I'm excited to see it. And I think that it is a bright spot and a lot of dark spots in our country right now. And it's uncertain what the future is going to look like, but I am so heartened to see that people are excited for this. I'm so glad that all of these TikToks exist internationally so that other people can see it. I hope more people heed the call to run openly socialist campaigns that speak to the hearts of people in not only the US, but across the world. And I'm excited just for the principle that you're reaching out because you know about Zohran and you're excited about his campaign. And I know that there are other people and other socialists in other countries that are excited about his campaign. And it's going to be an interesting experiment for our movement, but I also hope an experiment that helps people across the world think about these questions more deeply. And so thanks for having me on and to think through these questions with you all. I'll be excited to see what comes of it.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Green Left Show. As I mentioned at the start, if you'd like to support the work that we do, please head to greenleft.org.au/support. Plans start from just $5 a month, and it makes a massive difference to help us continue with this project. We'll see you next time on the next episode of the Green Left Show. Thanks for watching.